Hi, I'm Desiree. I'm from The Nerd Element. I'm a blogger there. I'm also a freelance writer. And I hope you're all doing well during this pandemic. I know that New Zealand has got level 1, so I wish I could travel there, but I know you won't let Americans in. So if we could go around the room, we'll start with John. If you could please introduce yourself and tell me how you got started in the business and what you do.
Well, hi, Desiree. I got started in the business in way too long ago, in 1974, when I was 18 years old. I went directly into television. And at that time, there wasn't really a New Zealand film industry, and that really happened over the next 10 years. And in the 80s, we had a renaissance of film. And so I entered the freelance film world and worked with some of the early greats of New Zealand film. And in '84, I really specialised in sound. And from then on, I haven't really stopped through to today. So, over that period, I've seen the really growth of the New Zealand film industry and the explosion that happened post Lord of the Rings, which really put us on the map and has created Wellington as really a post-production centre of international standing. So, I'm amazed how the industry has really grown and just exploded here. And I'm hoping that we're in a new age of it just currently happening.
Matt?
Yeah, so I actually did a music degree around the turn of the century, and I took one paper. I was expecting to become a famous composer, an orchestral composer. And I took a paper that was called electroacoustic at the time. I had no idea what it meant. I thought that looks fun. And you go into a studio, they give you a microphone and say, go and record everything. It doesn't have to be instruments, can be anything in the world. And then go back in the studio and make a piece of music out of it. I thought, this is cool. And then I realized that was around the time when Lord of the Rings was kicking off, right? And I was working with a fantastic sound designer at the time called Tim Preble, and he said, hey, you should have a look and see what this going on at Lord of the Rings. And so I hopped in there, like a lot of people, and suddenly this amazing world opened up that all sound can be thought of musically. And to me, it was sound design is creating music out of non-musical instruments necessarily to fabulous pictures. And it's just been a wild ride since then. So that was 20 years ago. But then, so since then I worked on a slate of New Zealand films and some international productions as well, such as the old 30 Days of Night, which I'm sure you've heard about.
Oh, yes.
Hobbit movies and the big productions as well. And it's been a wonderful time.
And Carrie.
Hi, so I'm Carrie Mclaughlin, and I started in sound very much by accident. I'm a dancer by, I trained in tertiary dance education and then went to study overseas in New York. Just before I went away, and I was trying to save some money, and a father of another dancer friend of mine said, oh, look, come in and I need a Foley artist. And we're doing the Ray Bradbury series, and our current Foley artist is not available. And I'm like, I didn't even know what it was, but I went, okay. So yeah, arrived in the studio with floor surfaces and props and microphones, and I just had absolutely no idea what it was I was doing. But he just said, mimic what you see, get to know the character, and follow through like you're the actor, the sound double for the actor. So that was when I was 18. Then I went overseas, came back, didn't really expect anything, and then just got a call and said, we've got these movies lined up, come in. And I just went, I'd had such a good time, and it was such a wonderful, just such a creative thinking all the time, thinking on the spot. I just loved that. I loved how textural it was. I loved how you could layer up sounds. I loved how you could help sort of influence the audience a little bit by how you chose to use sound. And I loved working with the recordists and meeting the sound designers. And I'm just like, this is just like super cool. It's super kind of big and broad, and I loved that. So as well as continuing to perform on stage, I really got into Foley, and there was a lot of work coming up from like 96 when I started to get back into it again, right through till now. So and I got to work with John. He had a company called Eden Terrace Audio at the time, and I popped up there to do some work, and there was the National Film Unit at the time that then turned into Park Row Post, and then I've just had a really awesome time developing my skill on the way, because there's not a Foley school you can go to. So I mean, now I think at Massey here you can do a paper or you get it to a little bit of a taste of it, but I guess I needed to create or to sort of harness my skill through working with awesome people like the two gentlemen here, and a plethora of other people. It's like life's university of sound. You just learn. Mike Hopkins, Tim Preble, Chris Ward, go on and on. But I just am loving it more and more, so much that I actually want to give away my other forms of expression and just sink straight into Foley.
All right, so I want to start a little bit general with what you do in terms of the studio, and then we'll move into discussion of your work on Coming Home in the Dark. So if you could tell me a little bit about POW Studios, like how did you form the studio and the services that you provide?
Well, we formed the studio in 2015, basically because between the bigger jobs, there can also be what we call the desert, when nothing really happens a lot, especially in Wellington. So three of us decided to actually form a group and thought, well, it would be better if we try and source work offshore. So Matt, myself, and Jason Canovas formed POW Studios, and we went offshore, and we had some success in getting Asian projects through. So we've done now 3 Asian projects and about to begin a 4th in about a week's time. So it was really formed to create a platform that we could market our services rather than be individual. We thought if we were together, we would have more success, and we have. And now we do the full range of audio, and we've also starting to do picture, editorial grading, and VFX as well. So we're becoming more of a boutique, full-service post-production facility. Our real background is in sound editorial and sound design and sound mixing.
That's right. And when I started all those years ago, almost everybody I knew who worked in sound was a contractor. Now, a contractor is good because you're your own boss, and it's bad because you're your own boss, your own administrator, your own hustler, your own accountant, and occasionally you might get to do a bit of the creative work as well. Joining forces like this and having people playing to their strengths and able to pass on that knowledge to younger people wanting to come through and getting into the sound industry has really helped the industry, certainly in Wellington, blossom, but it's much more rewarding as a person as well.
And it's also given us the ability to create a team, and we've brought younger people through, which is the biggest pleasure I have, is seeing younger people grow and blossom and really get into discovering all the wonderful aspects that can be in this job and in this profession, and there's so many detailed, areas and layers to get involved with. And so, it's been really exciting developing younger talent. I think that's been the greatest thing over the last 5 years. That's really, I feel the proudest of.
For me, I think what I love about being part of POW is that you really do feel like you're part of a group and a collective, and often as a Foley artist you can feel quite isolated because there's yourself and a Foley recordist, and you're often locked away in a dark room for hours on end. And what I love is that John and Matt and all the team are constantly feeding in and checking in, and you feel really cared for. You feel like you are part of this larger group, and that what you're doing is really making a difference to the whole casserole of what sound is, I guess. Like what you do is actually really respected and cherished, and you really feel like they're waiting to see what you've done that day to feed in on what's going on. Like you don't feel just sort of like hanging out, out on a cliff just doing your work and you don't know what's going to happen to it. And I love that feeling. That's really wonderful. They're really family inclusive, so they understand if you have a family like I do of younger children, which is a blessing, because often it's just like 19-hour days, 8 days a week, and I really feel that that's also, they understand about family and ego. Like, there's just no ego. Everyone's just appreciative of every facet, and that is just super refreshing. So it's just a pleasure. And every time you walk into POW Studios, you just feel welcomed, and it's just a lovely, inclusive place to work. Not that I actually work at the lovely studio, I work in another studio, but you just really feel part of something that wants to embrace you, and we're all moving forward together, I think, which is very refreshing, very lovely.
And then if you can answer this question quickly, what's the difference between sound mixing and sound editing, and then sound design? And if you could talk a little bit about what Foley artists do exactly. I've seen documentaries where they're doing the lightning with a sheet of metal and things like that. So I was just curious about if you could tell the audience, our readers and our audience, what that's like.
Shall I start first?
Yeah.
Whoever you want, yeah.
So Foley to me is the well, it's what when they have a microphone on set, they're either got a little radio mic, which is picking up dialogue, or there's that boom you might see where they're holding the boom mic out and it's hanging down to catch the dialogue. So the most important thing for them on set is to make sure they get the dialogue. So all those other extraneous sounds around don't often get caught. And there's incredible sound editors which can catch all of those sort of larger sounds, although you might see on documentaries people making thunder. I usually leave that to the sound editors to have these amazing libraries. So for me as a Foley artist, it's catching all those subtle things that the actor is touching, or actually even the way the cloth moves. So when you probably when you're walking through the world, you probably don't hear those little subtle sounds. Like you might hear your rain jacket move as you go to pay a credit card, or you might. But everything the actor touches, how they walk, that's my favorite part actually, is walking the actors through the film.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so real time, you need to interpret the actor. And especially in a film like Coming Home in the Dark, or actually 30 Days a Night, if we're going to pop that one in, and Desiree, you have lovely snow in your background. That film was...
but no vampires.
Luckily, was walking characters through snow, and like getting those subtle effects of crunch top layer sinking through and then footfall, and so which I think grounds the character in the film. Or if it's a horror, you might have this wonderful footstep with a lovely little creak at the end, or helping create the tension through the way they move through the film, I guess. Then there's all things like, there might be like a wonderful scene, I think there was one I did in The Hobbit, where all the little dwarves are having this fantastical, not a dinner party, but they're hungry, and there's all these amazing things happening on the table, and you're doing all of the tankards up and down, and plates breaking, and knife falling, and someone hitting, or the creak of the chair, and you're just helping layer up the sounds around the actors to ground them in the film, and to help make them feel like they're sitting within the film. So I don't kind of explode anything, or yeah.
Yeah, that comes to the sound editorial part. The simplest way I think of the difference between sound editing and sound mixing is that sound editing is the what, and the mixing is the how. So sound editing is all the sounds, not so much the Foley, but all the other sounds that you can't do in a Foley studio, such as the cars going by, or the explosions, or the animals, or the weaponry and things like that. All of the material that goes into the film, even the roars and the vocals of fantastical creatures, all comes under sound effects and sound editorial. Mixing is what happens once all those are assembled and put in the film and made to play. So it's not all just a big mess. You mix and you craft so that the focus of the sound is on whatever's happening in the plot or the story at that time. And then, of course, mixing involves when the music is all done, blending that in and mixing that into the dialogue so that it's all coherent and it sounds good. What do you reckon, John?
Oh, I don't think I've got anything to add. I'll be short. You know, I think it's fine. Like, and I think sound design, I've got a different view of sound design than a lot of people. Sound design is really the overall. You know, it's not doing fantastic sounds. That's sound designing, or being a sound designer. But sound design itself is the whole concept. I always think that's really what you're doing. You're orchestrating all the elements to come forward. Sound mixing is bringing those to the fore, but you've got to have a design of what you're doing. And in something like Coming Home in the Dark, which is an atmospheric, tense thriller, that you know, all the elements are going to tell that story. So sound design is really telling the story through sound. You know, that's how I see it.
Actually, that's a great segue into talking about Coming Home in the Dark, because there's a lot of use of silence that drives the horror of what's happening to the family. But the film never lets up on the tension, as can sometimes happen during a quiet moment in a horror film, especially, or a thriller. Normally you have this score that will cue you what's happening on the screen. You have some screen stingers. So I was wondering, what was your approach to the design of the sound for this film?
I think the approach was very much rooted in reality, and but based on a really slightly off-kilter approach, which meant that there was an equal value to the smallest to the largest. So you didn't know when that was coming. You know, as you say, there's not a lot of score, and a lot of the score plays after moments that have happened. And so it's all the tension that builds up. Like in the first act, then we're building to the moment you start to you feel it, but you're not quite sure when it's going to happen. And I think that was conscious effort of making the smallest detail, the flap of a jacket has a certain tension in it. And a lot of the critics have come out and said, oh, it's tense and it's taut, and have not really realized that it's actually the soundtrack working on them. You know, it's obvious to think of cinematography and music because it's got a concrete, but our whole effort is over the whole film to never let you out of the grip. And that, I think it's based on the fact that you don't know when it's all going to happen, or there's quite shock value at times.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing that you mentioned, Desiree, is that you mentioned the term silence, and I wonder if you were noticing the silence of the score, whereas if you had another look at it, you might notice that it's not actually silent after all, because that's one of the best compliments that we could get, is that it's not completely silent. There's always some kind of creepy sound going on that you're trying to get away from because of the subject matter. And that's where sound designers can become so manipulative to the audience, because
it works.
You can shut your eyes, but you can't shut your ears, and that creeping dread through the soundtrack, which is a really subtle thing, is still there affecting you, even though you're hoping to withdraw yourself from the horrible subject matter that might be happening at the time.
You know, that's exactly what I was doing, because I knew I was going to do this interview, so I did pay a little more attention to the sound than I would if I was just watching a movie and letting it carry me through. Some of my notes are silly because I'm like, that was a squishy sound and that was a weird sound, you know. So if you could talk about, without going into too many spoilers, for example, the scene where Jill's by a fence and Mandrake's approaching her, so we won't go into any more detail than that. The sound in that scene really stood out to me because it was so incredibly tense. And if you could, and there was a sound after the scene that sounded like a cello. I'm not sure if that was part of the score or if that was part of the design. If you could tell me about designing that particular scene, just the tension of him approaching her. We won't go into any more detail than that.
I think the key there is you're saying you're not quite sure if it's score or if it's sound effects.
Yeah, it's a fabulous compliment.
And there's one sound that one of our sound editors came up that he added in that I'm sure the composer thought he did, which is this tension sort of building bang that was all done in the soundtrack. And I think that the Foley there is really important because you just hear the slight tension of her crawling on the ground, and as Mandrake comes, and always the Foley is about the presence of the person and focus. and Mandrake's circling of her and coming towards her, and that sort of thing, as the music and the sound effects and the tension builds. It is in the small things. I think in this movie, it's the small things that really get you, and I think that's what we used a bit in this. But the score and the sound actually just blended, and that's totally, I think, the greatest approach, rather than them fighting. I've been on bigger movies where it's like there seems to be a competition. They put in a score and we've got all these sound effects. Oh, I'll get an orchestra. It's a shootout. But this was totally designed to sit within each other, and the score is quite abstract. It's not traditional.
Yes.
And it's using sort of bowed instruments. It is quite unusual, but it leaves a lot of space. It left a lot of space for us to work in. And we had the score quite early on as well, so we knew what we were dealing with. So it didn't come at the end, and so we could actually work off it. And so we knew exactly what we're doing, and so that it all became one. I think that's the real idea in this, that the whole soundtrack, dialogue, sound effects, Foley, all those things weren't disciplines that were shining. They were just making the soundtrack.
And on that note, even the sound department in relation to the pictorial material, we worked closely with editorial and with the director all the way through the process of getting the rushes, and while editorial was going on, to make sure not just the sound works together within itself, but the sound and the cut is working together concurrently to make the picture even stronger throughout the process.
I think.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Carrie. No, go ahead.
I was just going to support what John and Matt were saying, that the Foley in this film, I think, is probably the most, there's so much time I spent literally with a piece of fabric, just literally trying to get just the right head turn. It was such minutiae work, because I'm allowed to say that a lot of it happens in the car. So
right.
A lot of the scenes happen in the car. And so, when you're uncomfortable in a car, you're just going to move slightly, but you don't want the guy who's driving to know you're moving slightly, to just give your gaze slightly over your shoulder. But we tried in Foley to just give those beautiful, real, but slightly heightened, maybe seat creak, or just all the subtlety, all the slight finger moves, or it was probably the smallest little sounds that we spent the most time on, or in that scene where she's crawling on the rocks or the gravel, just making sure that we didn't rush over those parts. Those were the parts that needed the most important heel fall, and then the toe coming. And honestly, we spent so much time just on the smallest little details to make sure that it felt really real. Because if you don't quite get something right, it can pull people out, I find anyway. And I think kind of clunky Foley can disengage you. So we really, really wanted to support all of the really amazing work that editorial were doing by just making it as succinct as possible. So lots of tiny sounds. So when they went back and probably played what we were doing all day, they'd be like, rustle, slight creak. Yeah, it was super. It was quite an amazing project to work on. That there were not very many environments. There were certain. It wasn't like spanning the country. It was like these environments that we got to really set up and really concentrate on making as textural, but as subtle as possible. Yeah.
Well, even when Hoagie and Jill are reaching between the seats to hold each other's hands, for example. That stood out to me as, just that small sound, and you're wondering how the other two characters, Tubbs and Mandrake, are going to react, even that small movement and sound, because of what they're doing compared to what Jill and Hoagie are going through. Yeah. So how do you get those specific sounds right? Do you get the script first, and then you said you got the score to work with as well, to start your planning for all those myriad of sounds that you're going to have to capture and amplify or de-amplify, I guess, for the movie?
Really, we got the script, and we were involved actually sort of in part of it being a submission to get funding. And I supported, after reading the script, which was a real page turner. The first, the first act, it takes a real left turn that surprises.
Oh gosh, yes.
And we're not going to give anything away. But it takes a left turn that you go, heck. I was sitting in bed, and normally by about page 10 of my scripts, I go, oh, how long is this? And then, but I was just reading through, and then I went, okay, I've got to stop. I can't stop. So I just did the whole in one sitting, which I've never done. It's the best New Zealand script I've read in 30 years. So we supported it going forward to get funding. And James was the first, James Ashcroft, the director, the first time feature director, but a very experienced theatre director, and has done some shorts. And I've seen a theatre project that he had done, which was very cinematic. So I knew we were going to have a fantastic film. And then really we'd start our planning once we get the actual film, and we got earlier cuts of it. And so we knew what we were going to be doing. But in terms of like planning for Foley, we didn't actually have an incredibly long Foley recording time, did we, Carrie? So we had to be, Callum Scott, the Foley recordist editor, really just planned exactly what we were going to do. We knew what we were going to focus on. We knew that certain things were going to be important, like Mandrake's coat was very important in the earlier scene because it's a sort of weird presence of them. And even sort of down to gun rattles are important, because they're an important reveal, because, a lot of this movie, a lot of like the violence or things happens off screen. So you've got to sell that, so we have to sell either the violence or the subtlety of what's actually happened before you actually get to it. So, I think the biggest problem we had in this is that no one has actually mentioned the sound. They just think it's already tense. And I go, wait, job done. We did our job because it's, they go, oh, it's a lovely shot for cinematography. But, no one really knows that this whole texture comes back into a film in post-production. It's not captured by a microphone on set,
Right.
So, planning-wise, we didn't have a very long period totally, because this is actually quite a low-budget film. So it's just planning and organisation and team. And we had quite a biggish team working on this, and that's meant we could get through it, quickly, but everyone knew their role. And that's sort of the POW approach and what we've built up over the years. So we know we can do things quickly, but in detail, as Carrie was demonstrating. We knew there's certain bits you cannot skimp on, that you go, that we're going to really sell that. And I'm really pleased in this film that virtually everything ends up in the film. I've worked on bigger pictures where you work for 6 weeks and go, did anything I do end up in the film? Just all get obliterated by music, or, whereas in this, everyone's little elements do come to the fore, are actually in the film. And I think that's the most satisfying thing from my point of view as a supervising sound editor.
And that's a wonderful distinction to make. I know you asked about sound editing versus sound mixing. A lot of the films that all of us have worked on is to do all the editorial. We'll do everything in the film, every single tree leaf, every single elf, every single car in the background, and let the mixers sort it out. And we'll have a big long mix period, and then we could just all wait till the mix, which is great if you've got all the money in the world. But if you've got a smaller budget, then that planning period really makes sense, because you can say, okay, this is what's going to be in the film. The director's on board. They've had a look under the hood, and they know what they've got to play with when they get to the mix room. And it's a straightforward process to actually make what's there work, rather than the mixers turning up and throwing their hands up and saying, okay, there's 1,000 sound effects coming in here. Which ones do you want to play?
On that note, this was done slightly differently than most films. Well, it's now a new trend. The line between sound editorial and mixing has really started to blur a little bit. And once we'd done all the sound editorial, I spent about 5 weeks going through everything and pre-mixing most of the effects so that it was clear what we really wanted to play. So we were really presenting the material as this is what we're going to do. And that meant that we could get through a final mix fairly quickly. And in the final mix, I'm mainly concentrating on dialogue clarity because it's a heavy dialogue film. You know, like there's a long section of just in a car. You know, and I think that probably in some ways was one of the biggest challenges, was making that interesting still. You know, like making that journey interesting, and how when you use the engine, when it's just wind and rattle, and so you've got contrast, so it doesn't just become a roar. And so the silence is always shifting a little bit, you know, and moving. So I just think it's that to keep it tight and tense and keep you in the film was our job, and that no one's noticed it. I think it was just wonderful.
I'll say it totally worked. That movie really worked well for me. I'm a huge horror and thriller fan, so I was riveted and scared and just like, what's going to happen? And, you know, and then just even any little noise got my attention. And to what you were saying earlier about you may not have the visual, but you always have the sound. The part I said was squishy it goes toward the end of the film. So you can Hoagie and Mandrake. So you know what I'm talking about.
We use those same terms as well. Squishy and gooey. Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
It's like you don't see what's happening, but you hear it and you're like, oh, I don't want to see that. I don't want to, I'm like this. I don't want to see the aftermath.
That's the other thing, because your imagination is always going to be more powerful than what you can see. And so the darker your imagination is, the worse that sound is going to conjure for you. And yet, for some reason, everyone loves to do those squishy, violent sounds. That's why I mentioned 30 Days of Night and District 9 and those movies that we all worked on and loved. And now we've handed that on to some of the younger sound editors because they all want to have a crack at, you know, doing guts and blood and the rest of it.
Yes.
Oh, John, you were going to say something?
Well, it's sort of about everyone's commented on some of the violence in the film, but most of the violence is off screen. You know, there's a lot of violence, like for example, the gas station sequence is more powerful because you hear it, and then you briefly see moments of it, and it's like my wife hadn't seen the film, and till Sunday at the cast and crew, we had a sort of parallel screening in New Zealand at the same time. And it's just like I think she uttered, "Oh my God!" at that point. It was like, and I could visibly hear people wince, and it's purely in how you build up and not actually see it, and just have a flash of it, just go, "Oh," you know. And I think it's way more powerful. And through my career, I've always noticed that in films I've worked on, that the sound is actually way more powerful than having a blood spurt or the head mashed into me, because you imagine that, and your mind somehow is far more gory than the visual effect.
Yes. I was expecting this from certain scenes that it was going to be pulp.
Well, but you don't see really. You see very little, of actual that, and I think it's just really the surprise of when those certain things happen that you are surprised by that moment, because it's not, it just comes out of nowhere. Because really the Mandrake character is, to me, is like a ghost walking through the world. He's already gone, and that is the strong thing in the film. Is that he has been, his background has created this character, and you actually feel something for him. Like weirdly, you feel you get it. I got it in the end, and the connection that and then he really has to be put out of his misery, because it's a misery walking
Yes.
through the world.
Yeah.
And I know that the Borsto element in some ways was something that James and Eli brought to the script, which wasn't in the original story.
Mhm.
And so they brought a whole element which gave a reasoning for the violence and an understanding of just if you crush a human spirit, they're not really human in the end, and that's the tragedy of Mandrake and Tubbs.
I was going to say the shocking thing we won't go into early in the film, to me, after we learn more of the story, seemed like more of a mercy from his perspective, based on what he went through as a child. So anyway, I know we're almost out of time, so I'd like to do my concluding question, which is always, what you're working on next, because I know that you guys are, Carrie said, you're back on level 1, so you have projects hopefully in the works. And if there's anything else you would like our audience to know about your work or the movie, this is the time. So whoever wants to go first.
Oh, I'll leave them first. We're about to embark on another mad Chinese animated film called Young Lion Dancer. 2 years ago, we did a film for Yi Animation in Guangzhou, and they've come back again and want us to do their second film. The first film we did for them was all the characters were food. It's an animated film. So the leading character was a steamed bun, and his nemesis was the sushi roll. So it was quite a challenge to make a soundtrack for that. So we're really looking forward to doing another. I'm hoping it's sort of whimsical and comedic and fun and getting out of a dark place that Coming Home is.
Oh gosh, that might be so bleak.
To get that contrast, I love sort of that type of thing, and doing a soundtrack for animation is just joyous, because you've got to really create the whole picture. There's nothing to start with. There's only a pure dialogue track. Mm-hmm. So you are creating the whole world. So, we're really looking forward to doing that. We, again, like any Chinese project, everything's done at the last moment. It's mad, whatever is coming out, they'll be releasing it in China in July. And then they told me, said, "Oh, we'll give you the dialogue by the beginning of July." I said, "No, you've got to get it earlier than that." But we've done now quite a few Chinese projects, and this is the second time with this company, and it's just wonderful to actually do a cross international co-production.
Yeah, and on that note, we are actually very non-violent people. Even though we love human rights and we love humanity. Even though we love doing these violent films, we also love doing lovely, whimsical and fun films. I mean, John mentioned Kung Fu before. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's quite rare to. I don't know if it's had a screening in the West yet, but if you ever get a chance to see it, it's called Kung Fu. And as John said, every character in every environment is made of food. My favourite bit is when the steamed bun and salmon roll, who are chained together, it's kind of a buddy movie, stumble upon the land of tofu, the land of tofu. And
oh boy!
Tofu frog, leaping around on these tofu blobs, trying to eat them because it thinks they're bugs. And you talked about squishy. Now that's a deliciously squishy movie to hear if you ever get the chance.
Yeah, I'll definitely look for it. Carrie?
Oh well, yeah, I'm super excited about, because I've got 2 youngish children, so I'm kind of coming back into the scene after having a couple of years off. So I'm now I've dedicated myself to POW, so I'm super looking forward to working on this recent film. The one that I worked on, the Chinese co-pro, was called 10,000 Years, which was a few years earlier than that, which was following a young girl through her rite of passage, which strangely also ended up in a food fantasy world at the end.
Yeah, that's right.
And all sorts of things. So yeah, and that film, 10,000 Years, was my first feature-length animated film, which had always been a dream of mine, to be able to work and create sounds for characters that have no reference. There's no reference to it, so it's up to you to plant these little characters in a world. This little girl Tina had what was it, John? It was a Tibetan Mastiff.
Oh yeah, right. Dog. Yeah.
This massive big Tibetan Mastiff that was her sidekick, so It was trying to get personality for him as he lolloped through the snow, and just making them a little team as they, you know. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this next film, seeing it's got dancing in it, line dancing in it. I may be able to bring some hidden talents. I actually did film, Tua Fraser filmed the ballet Giselle on stage, and so I was brought on board to actually reenact all of the classical ballet on this stage. And I tell you, I haven't been in pointe shoes since I was 18. So my job was to actually recreate these ballet dancers on stage doing pointe work and so forth. So I wonder if I have to get my cowboy boots out for this. It's good to be able to bring some past skill to what you're doing presently. Yeah. So I'm just really excited about whatever's going to come this year. And as I think John said in an earlier interview, it was like at the beginning of the year, you never quite know what the rest of the year is going to pan out as. And then you get to the end of the year and go, wow, we did that. So I'm just super interested and excited about what the year brings and the future too. Like, yeah.
Because Desiree, one of the other interesting things here, as you mentioned, we're at level 1. Everyone is clamoring to come to New Zealand to get in to do their production. We have Avatar in town at the moment finishing, and we have a TV production series out at POW Studios from the States.
Lord of the Rings TV.
Lord of the Rings TV. And Auckland is full up. Wellington is full up virtually. Or not full up, but we could do more work. But, you know, everyone has come down here because we can actually operate it, you know, as you can see, really, we don't have social distancing. And the number of outbreaks have been very low, and most of it's contained at the border. So I'm sorry you won't be able to come in because they've shut most of the border to foreign, especially from the US and UK.
Yes, I know.
But you can quarantine. But we're just super lucky that we can work on stuff and carry on working. So yeah.
And on that note, Desiree, we wish you the best for
Thank you.
For the COVID situation, because you know if the media reports are anything like the reality, then I hope this is the year that particularly the US gets it under control, and all our best.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, come and see us.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to tour your studio. Sound is one of my favorite things in movies. And I actually am one of those people who listens more for that stuff, for the cues and everything. And I noticed, because I watch a lot of horror, I noticed the spaces where there aren't the cues that really ratchet up that tension. So great job on this film. It's a really good film, and I hope that everyone gets a chance to see it. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and have a good, blessed day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I always forget if it's right or left over. Namaste, but namaste. Thank you. Right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.